long before the golden light of the Erd tree ever touched the lands between, before the age of gods and demigods, before the very concept of grace or destiny took root in this world. The earliest known events of Elden Ring's lore predate the age of the Erd Tree by millennia, involving the primordial dragons and the Greater Will's arrival in the lands between, a collision of cosmic forces that would set in motion thousands of years of divine ambition, catastrophic war, forbidden love, political betrayal, and the ultimate shattering of reality itself. What began as a world ruled by ancient stone scaled dragons soaring through eternal storms would transform into a golden age of impossible beauty, only to collapse into ruin when the children of a goddess turned against one another in a war so devastating that it broke the fundamental laws holding existence together. This is a story that spans epochs, from the time when dragons were immortal and unkillable through the rise of an empire built on the power of a cosmic ring of light, to the night a demigod was murdered and everything that had been built over centuries crumbled in a single generation. It is a tale of Queen Marika the Eternal, a god who ruled for ages uncounted, but harbored a secret grief that would drive her to destroy her own creation. It is the story of her children, demigods born with fragments of ultimate power, each nursing their own obsessions, their own hungers, their own reasons to tear their family apart. It is the chronicle of Radagon, the red-haired champion who was both Marika's consort and, impossibly, Marika herself, two beings sharing one body in a mystery that cuts to the heart of what the gods truly are. It encompasses the tragedy of Godwyn the Golden, the first demigod to die, whose corrupted undeath would spread like a plague beneath the earth. It holds the madness of the frenzied flame, an outer force that seeks not to rule the world, but to melt all life and matter back into primordial chaos. It contains the ambitions of Rani the Witch, who murdered her own body to escape the control of the gods and set in motion a conspiracy that would change the fate of the world. Within this history, you will find Radon, the mightiest warrior ever born, who loved his scrawny horse and held back the very stars themselves until rot consumed his mind. You will discover Millennia, the undefeated blade cursed with scarlet rot from birth, whose love for her brother drove her to unleash a plague that turned an entire region into a festering wasteland. There is Moog, who kidnapped his own half-brother and tried to raise him as a consort to a blood god. There is Rykard, who fed himself to a god-devouring serpent so he could consume the world from within. There is Morgoth, the Omen king who defended the capital that had imprisoned and despised him his entire life. There are the tarnished, warriors stripped of grace and exiled to die beyond the fog, only to be called back centuries later when the gods had no one else left to turn to. There are outer gods circling this world like vultures, each whispering promises of power, each offering their own vision of order or chaos, each seeking to claim the Elden Ring for their own unknowable purposes. There is the Two Fingers, claiming to speak for the greater will, but perhaps long since abandoned by the very force they serve. There are the Numen, Marika's mysterious people, and the truth of what she did to them. There is the Knight of Black Knives, a conspiracy so perfectly executed that it killed what was supposed to be unkillable and shattered the Golden Order's claim to eternal stability. There are the Carrion Royals and their moon sorceries, the Redmanes who followed Radon into endless war, the Cleanrot Knights who stayed loyal to Millennia even as their bodies rotted away, the Albinorics who were created as a race and then hunted to near extinction, the Misbegotten who rose up against their enslavers, the dragons who made pacts with humans and taught them lightning, the ancient death sorcerers who were purged for refusing to accept the Erd Tree's vision of immortality, the Godskins who hunted and flayed gods before the age of the Erd Tree, the fire giants whose flame could burn the Erd Tree itself and who were nearly genocided for that power, the shamans of Marika's village who were harvested and melted together in jars in an atrocity that may have driven a young woman to become a god just to have the power to take revenge. This is a world where the line between God and mortal is thinner than it appears, where the divine can be killed and the dead can refuse to die properly, where love is as destructive as hatred, where loyalty leads to damnation, where the greatest heroes are also the greatest monsters, where the difference between order and tyranny depends entirely on who is telling the story. It is a place where the earth itself remembers violence, where the roots of a great tree drink deep from the blood of those buried beneath it, where grace appears as golden light pointing toward a destiny that may be salvation or just another form of slavery, where every throne is built on graves, where every crown weighs heavier than stone, where the words age of plenty and age of order mask centuries of oppression and erased histories. The lands between is a realm that has been conquered, unified, shattered, and abandoned by its own creators, left to rot with its demigod children, still squabbling over the pieces of their mother's power, still fighting wars that lost their meaning generations ago, still clinging to great runes that grant them just enough strength to prolong the agony, but not enough to actually fix what has been broken. And into this world of faded glory and corrupted divinity, you arrive, one of the tarnished, dead and exiled long ago, now called back by a grace you can see, but that no longer seems to have any clear purpose, guided by a maiden who may or may not be telling you the truth, encouraged by a witch in a tower and a finger reader and a merchant and a blacksmith and a dozen other voices, each with their own agenda, each offering you a path, each promising that their vision for the future is the right one. You are told to seek the Elden Ring, to become Elden Lord, to restore order. But the closer you get to the heart of this world, the more you discover that order was never as golden as the stories claimed, that the gods were never as benevolent as their statues suggested, that the shattering was not an accident, but an inevitability built into the very structure of in the prehistoric era, long before the age of men or the Golden Order, long before the Erd Tree stretched its golden boughs across the sky. The lands between existed in a state so ancient that even memory itself struggles to recall it. This was the age of the dragons, a time when the world belonged not to humanity, but to creatures of scale and storm, beings whose power was so absolute that the very stones trembled at their passing. The landscape itself was different then, wilder, more primal, shaped by forces that predated the order we would come to know. Mountains rose where dragons nested, valleys formed where their claws scraped the earth, and the sky was perpetually filled with the thunder of their wings. The ancient dragons ruled without question or challenge. These were not the lesser drakes or wyverns that would later populate the world's forgotten corners, but true dragons, magnificent and terrible, their bodies covered in scales that gleamed with an otherworldly luster. Their scales were not merely armor, but manifestations of primordial power, formed from gold and stone intermingled, creating a hide that was both beautiful and nearly impenetrable. Each scale caught the light differently, some shimmering with metallic brilliance, others possessing the weight and permanence of ancient rock. To witness a dragon in flight during this era was to see living geology given wings, to watch as the fundamental materials of the earth itself took animate form. At the apex of this draconic civilization stood Dragon Lord Placidusax, a being of such immense power and majesty that even among dragons he was considered supreme. Placidusax was not simply the strongest or the eldest, though he may well have been both. He held a title that spoke to a cosmic order, a position within a divine hierarchy. He was an Elden Lord, the first to bear that title, though the meaning of those words in that ancient age was different from what they would later become. To be Elden Lord in the Age of Dragons meant to stand as consort and champion to a god, to serve as the physical embodiment of divine will made manifest in the world. Placidusax's authority was not self-claimed but divinely appointed, a recognition of his role as the intermediary between the dragons and the god they served. This god, whose identity has been lost to the erosion of ages, was absent even then. Placidusax ruled in the stead of a deity who had departed, who had withdrawn from the lands between for reasons unknown. Perhaps this god fled from some cosmic threat, or was called to attend to matters in realms beyond mortal comprehension, or simply grew weary of the material world and retreated into whatever distant space the gods inhabit when they turn away from creation. Whatever the cause, the result was the same. The Dragon Lord found himself in the peculiar position of ruling on behalf of a god who was no longer present to guide or command, and so Placidusax waited. In the space that would one time be called Farum Azula, in a realm that existed somehow outside the normal flow of time, the great Dragon Lord lay in patient vigil, his multiple heads watching the horizons for any sign of his god's return. The society of dragons was rigidly hierarchical, a structure as ancient and immutable as stone itself. Placidusax stood at the pinnacle, but beneath him ranged a complex order of dragon nobility and power. Each dragon knew its place within this structure, understood its role and responsibilities. The ancient dragons were not merely beasts of instinct, but possessed intelligence and culture, a civilization built on principles fundamentally different from those that would later govern the Age of Men. Their laws were unwritten but absolute, their traditions passed down through generations, not in words, but in the very essence of what it meant to be dragon. Strength mattered, certainly, but so did lineage, the quality of one's scales, the mastery of the ancient dragon lightning that was their birthright. This dragon lightning was itself a manifestation of their connection to something greater than themselves. When an ancient dragon called down red lightning from the sky, it was not merely wielding a weapon, but channeling a force that existed before the world took its current shape. The red lightning was different from the golden lightning that would later become associated with the dragons after their defeat, different in color and in essence. It was the lightning of the primordial storm, the electrical fury that had crackled across the skies when the world was young and unformed. To be struck by ancient dragon lightning was to experience a force that predated civilization itself, that connected directly to the raw power of creation. The source of the dragon's might lay not only in their scales and lightning, but in their connection to something called the crucible. The crucible was the primordial form of what would eventually become the Erd tree, though to call it a tree at all would be misleading. The crucible was not a plant, but a concept made manifest, a churning vital force that represented life in its most fundamental and undifferentiated state. Imagine, if you can, a great melting pot of existence itself, a place or state where all the various forms of life that would later emerge existed in potential, blended together without distinction or separation. The crucible contained everything that would eventually become the diverse flora and fauna of the lands between. But in that ancient age, none of it had yet separated into distinct forms. Life that emerged from the crucible in this era was raw and strange, bearing characteristics that would later be considered monstrous or unnatural. Creatures might possess horns and wings and tails all at once, features that would eventually be divided among different species, but which in the Crucible Age existed together in singular beings. This was not chaos exactly, but rather a different kind of order, one based on the principle that all life was fundamentally connected, that the boundaries between different forms of existence were not as fixed as they would later become. The crucible represented life's potential in its purest form before the world decided what shapes life should take. The dragons themselves were products of this crucible age, though they had achieved a form more stable and perfected than most other creatures of that time. Their scales of gold and stone were crucible manifestations, physical expressions of the primordial forces that churned at the heart of all existence. The dragons had, in a sense, mastered the crucible's power, had learned to embody its strength without losing themselves to its chaotic potential. This mastery was part of what made them the dominant force in the lands between, what allowed them to impose their order on a world that was still in the process of deciding what it would become. Yet, even as the dragons ruled their domain with absolute authority, even as Placidusax maintained his patient vigil and the crucible churned with undifferentiated life, forces beyond the lands between were taking notice. In the vast cosmic expanse that exists beyond the material world, in spaces between spaces where beings of immense power dwell, an entity known as the Greater Will turned its attention toward this realm. The Greater Will was an outer god, a being whose existence operated on principles and scales incomprehensible to mortal minds. Outer gods exist outside the normal structure of reality, observing and occasionally interfering in the worlds that spin through the void. They are not gods in the sense of being powerful beings within the world, but rather forces that act upon the world from without, shaping events according to their own inscrutable purposes. The Greater Will had been watching the lands between for some time, observing the reign of the dragons, the churning of the crucible, the slow development of this realm. What motivated the Greater Will's interest is difficult to say with certainty. Perhaps it saw potential in the lands between, a world that could be shaped according to its vision of order. Perhaps it simply desired to expand its influence, to bring another realm under its dominion. Or perhaps the Greater Will operated according to principles so alien that human concepts like desire and motivation do not truly apply. Whatever its reasons, the Greater Will made a decision that would fundamentally alter the course of history in the lands between. It would establish its influence over this realm, would impose its own order upon a world that had previously existed according to different rules. The Greater Will did not act directly, for beings of such cosmic magnitude rarely do. Instead, it sent an emissary, a vessel of its power that could exist within the material world and serve as the foundation for the order it wished to establish. The method of this sending was dramatic and unmistakable. A golden star appeared in the sky above the lands between, descending from the cosmic void with purpose and intent. This was not a natural meteor, not a random chunk of celestial debris, but a deliberately aimed projectile, a divine message written in fire and light across the heavens. The ancient dragons must have watched this star's descent with concern, perhaps even fear. They had ruled unchallenged for so long that the appearance of something from beyond their world, something that moved with clear purpose toward their domain, must have seemed like an omen of change. The star blazed across the sky, growing larger and brighter as it approached, until it seemed that a second sun had been born in the firmament. The light it cast was golden, warm, but also overwhelming, a radiance that suggested both beauty and terrible power. When the golden star finally struck the earth, it did not explode or scatter into fragments as a normal meteor would. Instead, it opened, unfolded, revealed what it had carried across the vast distances between worlds. From within the golden star emerged the Elden Beast, a creature unlike anything the lands between had ever seen. The Elden Beast was not a dragon, not a product of the Crucible, but something entirely other, something that had been shaped by forces and principles foreign to this realm. Its form was strange and beautiful, possessing a grace that seemed almost aquatic, as if it swam through air as easily as a fish moves through water. Its body gleamed with golden light, and within that light could be seen patterns and structures that suggested a deeper order, a complexity that went beyond mere physical form. The Elden Beast was more than just a powerful creature. It was a living embodiment of the greater will's power, a physical manifestation of the cosmic force that had sent it. Within the Elden Beast resided something that would come to be known as the Elden Ring, though in this primordial moment it was not yet a ring in any conventional sense. It was rather the fundamental pattern of order that the greater will wished to impose upon the lands between, the blueprint for a new age, a new way of organizing reality itself. The Elden Beast carried this pattern within itself, was inseparable from it, served as both vessel and guardian for the divine order it represented. The arrival of the Elden Beast marked a turning point, though the full consequences of this moment would not be immediately apparent. The age of the dragons was still in full force. Placidus Sax still reigned as Elden Lord, and the ancient dragons still commanded the skies and mountains. But something new had entered the world, something that carried within it the seeds of transformation. The greater will had established its presence in the lands between, had planted the foundation for the order it would eventually impose. The golden star had fallen, the Elden Beast had emerged, and though the dragons did not yet know it, their age of absolute dominion was beginning to draw toward its close. The Elden Beast did not simply arrive as a visitor or emissary. It became something far more fundamental to the very structure of existence itself. Upon its descent into the lands between, the Elden Beast underwent a transformation that would bind it irrevocably to the world it had been sent to govern. It became the living embodiment of the Elden Ring, a fusion of cosmic will and physical form that would serve as the anchor point for all the laws and principles the greater will wished to impose upon reality. This was not a mere symbolic gesture or a title bestowed upon a powerful entity. The Elden Beast literally merged with the conceptual framework of the Elden Ring, becoming inseparable from it. Where the beast existed, so too did the ring. Where the ring's influence extended, the beast's essence permeated. This union created a unique situation in which a living creature served as both the guardian and the physical manifestation of an abstract system of cosmic law. The Elden Ring itself was never a simple physical object, despite how it might appear in certain visions or manifestations. It was, at its core, a conceptual construct, a framework of principles and laws that determined how reality itself would function within the sphere of the greater will's influence. Think of it as the fundamental code underlying existence, the rules by which matter, energy, life, and death would operate. The ring contained within its structure the very definitions of concepts like gravity, time, causality, life, and death. It was not merely a tool for controlling these forces, but rather the template from which they derived their meaning and function in this particular corner of the cosmos. The runes that composed the Elden Ring were not decorative symbols, but rather fundamental particles of law, each one encoding a specific aspect of reality's operation. When these runes were arranged in a particular configuration, they created a stable system, a coherent set of natural laws that allowed for predictable, ordered existence. As the Elden Beast settled into its role and the Elden Ring's presence became more firmly established in the lands between, the ring's influence began to shape the very fabric of reality in profound and irreversible ways. The world that had existed before, governed by the primordial crucible's chaotic blending of life and the dragon's elemental supremacy, began to shift. Natural laws that had been fluid or inconsistent started to crystallize into fixed patterns. Gravity, which had perhaps operated according to different principles in the age of the crucible, began to follow the dictates encoded in the Elden Ring's structure. The cycle of life and death, which had been subject to the whims of the crucible's generative chaos, began to conform to new rules, new pathways. The very stones and soil of the land began to resonate with the ring's influence, their atomic structure subtly realigning to match the cosmic order being imposed from above. This was not a sudden transformation, but rather a gradual permeation, like dye spreading through water, touching everything it reached and altering it fundamentally. The dragons, who had reigned supreme over the lands between for time immemorial, could not help but notice these changes. Their dominance, which had seemed as eternal and unchangeable as the mountains themselves, began to wane as the greater will's influence grew stronger with each passing cycle. The ancient dragons had ruled through raw power, through their mastery of the fundamental forces of lightning and stone, through their near immortality and their position at the apex of the natural order. But the greater will was not challenging them on those terms. It was not seeking to defeat them in combat or to prove itself stronger in any conventional sense. Instead, it was rewriting the very rules by which strength and dominance were measured. The dragons found that their lightning, while still devastating, no longer held quite the same absolute authority it once had. The storms they commanded no longer shaped the world as completely as before. Other forces, forces aligned with the Elden Ring's order, began to assert themselves, creating a new hierarchy of power that did not automatically place the dragons at its summit. The arrival of the Elden Beast marked a fundamental shift in cosmic power, a rebalancing of the forces that governed existence in the lands between. Before, power had been largely a matter of raw strength, of primal force, of one's ability to dominate through sheer might or elemental mastery. The Crucible had rewarded adaptability and vitality. The dragons had represented the perfection of elemental power, made manifest in living form. But the Elden Ring introduced a different kind of power entirely, one based on alignment with cosmic law, on understanding and manipulating the fundamental rules of reality, rather than simply wielding great force within those rules. This was a more subtle form of dominance, but ultimately a more complete one. Those who could attune themselves to the Elden Ring's order, who could understand its principles and work within its framework, would find themselves wielding influence that transcended mere physical might. This was a concept that would take time for the inhabitants of the lands between to fully grasp, but its effects were immediate and undeniable. Some of the ancient dragons, possessed of wisdom accumulated over countless ages, began to acknowledge this new power and recognize it as something that could not simply be ignored or dismissed. Among these was Fortisax, a dragon of particular renown, whose golden lightning was said to be among the most fearsome forces in all the lands between. Fortisax, unlike some of the more rigid and traditional dragons, possessed a flexibility of thought that allowed for the consideration of new paradigms. This ancient dragon observed the changes wrought by the Elden Ring's influence and recognized that the world was entering a new phase, one in which the old certainties might no longer hold. Rather than viewing this development with pure hostility, Fortisax approached it with a cautious curiosity, seeking to understand what this new order might mean for dragonkind and whether there might be a place for dragons within it. This was not submission or surrender, but rather a pragmatic acknowledgement that the cosmos was larger and more complex than even the dragons had fully appreciated, and that adaptation might prove wiser than rigid adherence to the old ways. The ancient dragon society as a whole faced an existential challenge to its rule, one that struck at the very foundation of their civilization and their understanding of their place in the world. For untold ages, the dragons had been the undisputed masters of the lands between, the apex predators, and the supreme authorities on all matters of power and governance. Their society, while perhaps not organized in the same way as the humanoid civilizations that would come later, was nonetheless sophisticated, built on hierarchies of age, strength, and mastery of the ancient dragon lightning. The Dragon Lord Placidusax had served as the center of this society, the point around which all dragon culture and authority revolved. But now, with the arrival of the Elden Beast and the establishment of the Elden Ring's order, the dragons found themselves confronted with a power that did not acknowledge their supremacy, that operated according to principles they had not established and could not fully control. This was deeply unsettling for beings who had known nothing but dominance. Some dragons responded with defiance, retreating to their strongholds and refusing to acknowledge the legitimacy of this new cosmic order. Others, like Fortisax, sought accommodation or at least understanding. Still others simply withdrew, becoming increasingly isolated as the world changed around them. The concept of order itself, as dictated by the Elden Ring, began to manifest in tangible ways throughout the lands between. Order, in this context, meant more than simple organization or the absence of chaos. It referred to a specific, divinely ordained structure for reality, a set of immutable laws that would govern all aspects of existence. Under the Elden Ring's influence, the wild variability of the Crucible's creations began to give way to more stable, predictable forms of life. Species began to breed true, passing on consistent traits to their offspring rather than producing the chimeric amalgamations that had been common in the Crucible's heyday. The landscape itself began to settle into more permanent configurations, with mountains and valleys maintaining their shapes rather than shifting according to the whims of primal forces. Even abstract concepts like fate and destiny began to take on new meaning, as the Elden Ring's order imposed a kind of cosmic structure on the flow of events, creating patterns and cycles where before there had been only the chaotic unfolding of possibility. This order was not inherently benevolent or malevolent, it simply was, a framework imposed upon reality by a cosmic intelligence that viewed such structure as necessary and proper. The primordial crucible's influence, which had once been the dominant force shaping life and evolution in the lands between, started to be supplanted by the Elden Ring's order in a process that was both gradual and inexorable. The crucible had been a generative force, endlessly creative, producing new forms of life through the blending and merging of existing traits in combinations that defied easy categorization. It had been the source of the lands between's incredible biodiversity, the reason why so many strange and wondrous creatures had come into being. But the Elden Ring's order viewed this endless variation as a kind of chaos that needed to be constrained and directed. As the ring's influence spread, the crucible's power began to wane, not extinguished entirely, but rather pushed to the margins, relegated to certain specific locations or manifestations rather than being the universal force it had once been. New life that came into being increasingly conformed to the templates and patterns established by the Elden Ring rather than exhibiting the wild creativity of the Crucible. The ancient Crucible Knights, those warriors who had been blessed with aspects of the Crucible's power, found that their abilities, while still formidable, were increasingly viewed as primitive or barbaric by those who aligned themselves with the new order. The Crucible became associated with the past, with a more savage and less refined age, even though its power remained potent for those who could still access it. The Erd Tree, in its nascent form, began to draw power from the Elden Ring in a symbiotic relationship that would define the ages to come. The great golden tree, which would eventually tower over the lands between as the most visible symbol of the greater will's dominance, was at this point still young, still growing, still establishing its root system deep within the earth. But even in this early stage, the Erd Tree demonstrated a unique connection to the Elden Ring, serving as a kind of physical anchor point for the ring's abstract principles. The tree drew sustenance not merely from soil and water, but from the very essence of the Elden Ring itself, feeding on the cosmic energy that flowed through the ring's structure. In turn, the Erd Tree served as a conduit, channeling the ring's influence outward into the world, spreading its order across the land through both physical and metaphysical means. The tree's roots spread far and wide, not just through the earth, but through the very fabric of reality, creating a network through which the Elden Ring's laws could be transmitted and enforced. The golden light that emanated from the Erd Tree was not merely illumination, but rather a visible manifestation of the ring's order, a radiance that carried with it the weight of cosmic law. As the tree grew, so too did the reach and power of the Elden Ring, the two becoming increasingly intertwined and interdependent. The seeds of conflict between the ancient dragons and the new order were sown during this transitional period, planted in the fundamental incompatibility between the dragon's vision of the world and that imposed by the greater will. The dragons had thrived in a world where power was straightforward, where the strong ruled and the weak served or perished, where the natural order was determined by raw capability and primal force. The Elden Ring's order introduced complications, hierarchies based on divine favor rather than mere strength, laws that could constrain even the mighty if they violated the cosmic principles encoded in the ring's structure. Some dragons viewed this as an intolerable imposition, an insult to their ancient sovereignty. They saw the greater will and its elden beast as usurpers, foreign entities attempting to claim dominion over a world that rightfully belonged to dragonkind. These dragons began to prepare for conflict, gathering their strength and rallying those who shared their resentment of the new order. Other dragons, more pragmatic or perhaps more weary, sought to find ways to coexist with the new reality, to carve out a place for dragonkind within the structure being imposed by the Elden Ring. This division within dragon society would have profound consequences, weakening the unified front that might have been able to resist or at least significantly delay the greater will's ascendancy. The greater will established its first true foothold in the lands between through this combination of the Elden Beast's presence, the Elden Ring's pervasive influence, and the Erd Tree's physical manifestation. This was not a military conquest in any conventional sense. No armies marched, no battles were fought in these early stages. Instead, it was a conquest of reality itself, a fundamental restructuring of the world's underlying principles to align with the greater will's vision of cosmic order. The greater will did not need to defeat the dragons in direct combat because it was operating on a different level entirely, rewriting the rules by which victory and defeat were determined. By the time the dragons fully recognized the extent of the transformation taking place, the greater will's foothold was already secure, its influence already woven into the fabric of existence in ways that could not easily be undone. This was a masterful strategy, one that demonstrated the greater will's vast intelligence and its understanding of how to impose order on a chaotic cosmos. Rather than attempting to dominate through force, which might have provoked unified resistance, it simply made itself indispensable, made its order seem like the natural and inevitable state of things. The era of pure dragon rule transitioned into an era of divine influence through this gradual but relentless process of cosmic restructuring. The dragons did not vanish overnight, nor did they immediately lose all their power and authority, but their position as the unquestioned masters of the lands between was irrevocably compromised. They now shared the world with a power that operated according to different principles, a power that could not be challenged through the traditional means by which dragons had always resolved disputes. The age of elemental supremacy gave way to the age of divine law, and while dragons would continue to play important roles in the history of the lands between, they would never again enjoy the absolute dominance they had known in the primordial era. Some dragons adapted to this new reality, finding ways to maintain relevance and power within the changing world. Others retreated into isolation, clinging to the old ways and refusing to acknowledge the legitimacy of the new order. Still others would eventually enter into alliances with the powers that arose under the Elden Ring's influence, recognizing that cooperation might preserve more of their ancient heritage than feudal resistance. The stage was set for the eventual rise of Marika and the Golden Order through all these developments, though countless ages would still pass before that culmination would occur. The Elden Ring was now firmly established as the fundamental law of the lands between, its principles woven into the very structure of reality. The Erd Tree was growing, spreading its roots and its golden radiance across the land. The greater will had secured its foothold and was poised to extend its influence further. The dragons, while still powerful, were no longer the sole arbiters of the world's fate. The primordial crucible's wild creativity had been constrained, channeled into forms more acceptable to the new order. All the pieces were in place for the next great transformation, the rise of the demigods and the establishment of the Golden Order proper. But that story would unfold in its own time, through events and conflicts that would reshape the lands between yet again. For now, in this transitional age, the world existed in a state of tension between the old powers and the new, between the primal forces that had shaped its earliest days and the cosmic order that would define its future. With the age of stone and scale drawing to a close, the lands between stood ready for a transformation unlike any it had seen before. Where once dragons ruled from peaks of gray stone, a new power would soon take root, one that would reshape not just the land, but the very nature of life itself. We now enter the early age of the Erd Tree, a period that would establish the foundations of order, divinity, and law that would endure for ages to come. Before the Erd Tree as we know it came to be, there existed something far older, far stranger. The crucible of life, as it was known, represented the primordial forms from which the great golden tree would eventually emerge. The crucible was not a tree in the conventional sense, but rather a melting pot of all life, a churning cauldron of existence where the boundaries between species, forms, and essences blurred and merged. In the crucible, life was not separated into distinct categories. Wings might sprout from backs that would later bear only arms. Horns emerged from heads that would in time be smooth. Tails extended from bodies that would eventually stand upright without them. This was life in its most primal, most chaotic, most honest form. The crucible did not discriminate or categorize. It simply was, containing within itself all the potential variations that life could take. The energies of the crucible manifested in ways that would later be considered aberrant, monstrous even, but in this early time they were simply the nature of existence. Creatures born under the influence of the crucible carried aspects that blended the animal and the divine, the bestial and the noble. These crucible aspects, as they came to be known, included the growth of horns, the sprouting of wings, the extension of tails, and the development of breath attacks that seemed to channel the very essence of draconic power. The Crucible Knights, an order of warriors who would serve in the age to come, bore these aspects proudly, their bodies transformed by the primordial energies into something more than human, something that connected them directly to the source of all life. From this churning primordial soup of existence, a structure began to take form. The great tree, a massive and sacred entity, stood as a precursor to what would become the Erd Tree. The great tree was not merely large, it was fundamental to the lands between, its roots reaching deep into the earth, its branches stretching toward the heavens. Some scholars of the age would later debate whether the great tree and the crucible were one and the same, or whether the tree grew from the crucible as a flower grows from soil. What remained certain was that the great tree represented a transition point, a moment when the chaotic potential of the crucible began to take on structure, form, and purpose. The great tree served as a gathering point for life energy, drawing it up from the depths and channeling it outward into the world. Its sap ran gold, or so the legends tell, and where its roots touched the earth, life flourished with unusual vigor. The tree stood at the center of the world, both literally and metaphorically, a pillar connecting the earth below to the sky above. Around its base, civilizations began to gather, drawn by the sense of sanctity and power that radiated from its trunk. The great tree was not yet the Erd Tree, not yet the symbol of absolute order and divine law, but it was becoming something, evolving toward a purpose that would only become clear with the arrival of forces from beyond the lands between. It was upon this foundation that the Erd Tree proper would be established. The transformation from Great Tree to Erd Tree marked not just a change in name, but a fundamental shift in purpose and power. The Erd Tree became the central symbol of life and order in the lands between, a beacon of golden light visible from every corner of the realm. Its boughs stretched impossibly high, seeming to touch the very fabric of the sky itself. Its roots delved deep, connecting to the network of catacombs and burial grounds that would become the final resting places for countless souls. The Erd tree was not simply alive, it was the source of life, the wellspring from which all blessings flowed. The golden light that emanated from the Erd tree was not merely illumination, it was grace itself made visible, a tangible manifestation of divine favor and power. This light touched all things, bathing the lands between in a warm glow that seemed to promise eternal life, eternal prosperity, eternal order. The leaves of the Erd tree shimmered with this golden radiance, and when they fell, they did not decay, but rather dissolved into motes of light that would drift on the wind before being absorbed back into the tree's vast network of roots. The Erd tree had become a closed system, a perfect cycle of life, death, and rebirth that seemed to promise an end to the chaos and uncertainty that had defined earlier ages. But the Erd tree did not establish itself through natural processes alone. Its rise to prominence came hand in hand with the arrival of beings from beyond the lands between, emissaries of a power that sought to impose its will upon the world. The two fingers, strange entities that resembled enormous, gnarled digits rising from the earth, appeared in the lands between as representatives of the greater will. The greater will itself was an outer god, a force of cosmic proportions that existed beyond the physical realm, beyond even the concepts of space and time as mortals understood them. The greater will sought order above all else, a universe governed by immutable laws and hierarchies, and it had chosen the lands between as a place to manifest its vision. The two fingers served as the greater will's voice and eyes in the physical world. They could not speak in conventional language, but rather communicated through gestures and movements that required interpretation by specially trained finger readers, individuals who had devoted their lives to understanding the will of these alien entities. Through the two fingers, the greater will made its desires known, and chief among these desires was the establishment of a god who would serve as its vessel and agent in the lands between. The two fingers searched among the inhabitants of the realm for one who possessed the potential to bear this divine burden, one who carried within themselves the spark of something greater than mortal existence. They found such a being in Marika. Before she became a god, before she became eternal, Marika was Newman, a member of a long-lived race that had come to the lands between from beyond the fog that surrounded the realm. The Newmen were not native to this land, and perhaps it was this outsider status that made Marika suitable for the role the Greater Will had in mind. She possessed something that set her apart from ordinary mortals, a quality that the two fingers recognized as essential. She was Empyrean, a rare designation given to those who had the potential to become vessels for outer gods, those who could contain and channel powers that would destroy lesser beings. The Greater Will chose Marika to become a god, and in that choice, the fate of the lands between was sealed for ages to come. The process of ascension was not simple or painless. To become a god required sacrifice, transformation, and an absolute commitment to the order that the Greater Will demanded. Marika underwent this transformation, shedding her mortal limitations and becoming something new, something eternal. She became Queen Marika the Eternal, a title that spoke to both her divine status and her role as ruler of the lands between. As part of her ascension, Marika became the vessel of the Elden Ring. The Elden Ring was not a physical object in the conventional sense, though it could be represented as such. It was instead the fundamental as ordering principle of reality itself, the set of laws and rules that governed how the world functioned. The Elden Ring determined the nature of life and death, the relationship between body and soul, the flow of time and causality. It was composed of great runes, individual components that each governed specific aspects of existence. By housing the Elden Ring within herself, Marika became the living embodiment of order, the point through which all divine law flowed into the physical world. As an Empyrean bearing the Elden Ring, Marika was granted powers that transcended mortal understanding. Chief among these was the ability to mend the Elden Ring itself, to alter its fundamental structure, and thereby change the very laws of reality. This was a power of unimaginable scope, the ability to decide what was possible and what was not, what lived and what died, what was blessed and what was cursed. Marika could, in theory, reshape the world according to her will, though in practice she was expected to serve as the instrument of the greater will's vision rather than her own desires. With Marika established as the divine ruler of the lands between, the next step in the greater will's plan could proceed. The Golden Order was founded, a comprehensive system of laws, doctrines, and religious practices that would enforce the will of the greater will throughout the realm. The Golden Order was more than just a government or a church. It was a total ideology that sought to define every aspect of existence. It established hierarchies, determining who was blessed and who was cursed, who deserved grace and who should be cast out. It defined proper worship, proper behavior, proper thought. To live under the Golden Order was to accept that every aspect of your existence was subject to divine law. The Golden Order's fundamentalism, as it came to be known, was based on the study and interpretation of the laws encoded in the Elden Ring. Scholars devoted their lives to understanding the mathematical and metaphysical principles that governed reality, seeking to align themselves ever more perfectly with the greater will's design. Incantations were developed that could channel the power of the Golden Order directly, allowing the faithful to heal wounds, smite enemies, and protect the righteous. These incantations were not magic in the traditional sense. They were prayers made manifest, divine law given physical form through faith and understanding. But the establishment of the Golden Order required more than just doctrine and prayer. It required the suppression of anything that contradicted or predated its authority. The Crucible Knights, those warriors who bore the primordial aspects of the crucible of life, had once been honored and respected. They had served as elite protectors, their transformations seen as blessings that connected them to the very source of existence. But as the Golden Order solidified its power, these same aspects came to be viewed differently. The chaos of the crucible, its refusal to categorize and separate, its embrace of all possible forms of life, stood in direct opposition to the rigid hierarchies and definitions that the Golden Order demanded. The Golden Order began to suppress the Crucible Knights and their primordial aspects. The aspects themselves, the horns and wings and tails that had once been marks of honor, were now seen as aberrations, as signs of a primitive and chaotic past that needed to be overcome. Those who bore crucible aspects were increasingly marginalized, pushed to the fringes of society, or forced to hide their transformations. The Crucible Knights themselves found their status diminished, their order slowly disbanded as the Golden Order established its own military forces based on strict discipline and uniformity rather than individual transformation and power. The very concept of the crucible, of life as a melting pot of possibilities, was gradually erased from acceptable thought, replaced by the Golden Order's insistence on fixed forms and immutable categories. Yet the establishment of the Golden Order faced resistance not just from the remnants of older ways, but from powers that had never accepted any authority but their own. In the frozen peaks of the mountain tops of the giants, a civilization of enormous beings had long tended to a flame of terrible power. The fire giants, towering figures with skin like weathered stone and hair like frozen flame, served as guardians of the fell god, an entity of fire and destruction that stood in direct opposition to everything the Golden Order represented. The fell god's flame was not the controlled, life giving warmth of the Erd tree's golden light. It was wild, consuming, destructive. It was the flame that could burn even gods, the one fire that could reduce the Erd tree itself to ash. The Golden Order could not tolerate such a threat to exist. The Golden Order waged war against the fire giants, a campaign of extermination that would become one of the defining conflicts of the early age of the Erd Tree. Marika herself led the assault, wielding powers that no mortal army could match. The war was brutal and total. The fire giants fought with the desperation of those defending not just their lives, but their very reason for existence. They called upon the power of the fell god, channeling flames that could melt stone and boil the blood in a warrior's veins. But for all their size and power, for all the strength they drew from their god, they could not stand against the combined might of Marika's divine power and the armies of the Golden Order. Marika defeated the fell god in combat, a confrontation of divine powers that shook the very mountains. The details of this battle were not recorded in full, or perhaps were deliberately obscured, but the outcome was clear. The fell god was not destroyed, for such entities cannot be truly killed, but it was bound, imprisoned, reduced to impotence. With their god fallen, the fire giants faced annihilation. Marika showed no mercy. The giants were slaughtered almost to the last, their civilization destroyed, their cities reduced to ruins. But Marika did not kill them all. She left one alive, the last of his kind, and upon him she placed a terrible curse. The last fire giant was cursed to tend the flame of ruin, the very flame that his people had guarded for all eternity. He could not let it die, for it was the last remnant of his God and his people. But neither could he use it, for Marika had bound him with chains of divine power that prevented him from calling upon the flame's destructive potential. He was forced to exist in eternal solitude, tending a fire that represented everything he had lost, unable to die, unable to forget, unable to do anything but endure. It was a punishment designed not just to neutralize a threat, but to serve as a warning to any who might consider defying the Golden Order. With the threat of the fell god eliminated, the Golden Order expanded its influence across the lands between. Marika's armies marched to every corner of the realm, bringing the word of the greater will and the law of the Golden Order to all peoples. Resistance was crushed, alternative faiths were suppressed. The worship of other outer gods was driven underground or eliminated entirely. The Golden Order established churches, academies, and fortifications throughout the land, creating a network of control that ensured no region could exist outside its influence. The lands between flourished under Marika's rule, at least by the standards of those who benefited from the Golden Order's favor. Agriculture thrived as the Erd tree's blessing spread across the land, ensuring bountiful harvests and mild weather. Trade routes were established and protected, allowing goods and ideas to flow freely between regions. The arts flourished as artists sought to glorify the Golden Order and its divine queen. Architecture reached new heights as massive cathedrals and castles were constructed to demonstrate the power and permanence of Marika's reign. For those who accepted the Golden Order's doctrines and lived according to its laws, this was truly a golden age, a time of peace and prosperity unlike any the lands between had known. To solidify her rule and ensure the continuation of her divine lineage, Marika took a consort. Godfrey, a warrior of legendary prowess, became the first Elden Lord. Godfrey was not divine himself, but he was extraordinary even among mortals. He had proven himself in countless battles, demonstrating not just strength and skill, but the kind of indomitable will that could inspire armies and break the spirits of enemies. Godfrey was a conqueror by nature, a man who lived for the thrill of battle and the glory of victory. In him, Marika found the perfect complement to her divine authority, a mortal champion who could lead her armies and extend her rule through martial might, while she governed through divine law. With the Stormvale Kingdom brought to heel, Godfrey's attention turned to the skies themselves. The ancient dragons, primordial beings who had ruled the mountaintops since time immemorial, represented perhaps the greatest challenge to the Golden Order's supremacy. These were not mere beasts, but intelligent, powerful entities who commanded the very storms and lightning. Their civilization predated even the arrival of the Greater Will, and their dragon lord Placidusax had once served as Elden Lord to a god whose identity has been lost to history. Though Placidusax had retreated beyond time itself, his lieutenants remained, chief among them the mighty Fortisax, a dragon of tremendous power whose black lightning could rend the earth itself. The war against the dragons was brutal and protracted. Unlike the fire giants, who were bound to a single location, the dragons could strike from anywhere, descending from the clouds with devastating fury. Godfrey's armies suffered tremendous losses in the early engagements. Traditional weapons proved largely ineffective against the dragon's scales, which were harder than any armor forged by human hands. It was only through the development of specialized dragon hunting techniques and the capture of certain gravelstone seals that could repel dragon breath that the tide began to turn. The decisive battle took place at the peaks of the mountaintops of the giants, where Godfrey himself confronted Fortisax. The clash between the first Elden Lord and the ancient dragon shook the mountains, splitting stone and sending avalanches cascading into the valleys below. But the resolution of the dragon war proved more nuanced than simple extermination. Fortisax, recognizing the inevitability of defeat and perhaps seeing wisdom in accommodation, agreed to terms. Rather than face annihilation, the ancient dragons would be integrated into the Golden Order itself. This was a masterstroke of political maneuvering by Queen Marika. By absorbing the dragons rather than destroying them, she demonstrated the Golden Order's capacity for synthesis and growth. The dragons who bent the knee were granted positions of honor within the new hierarchy. Their lightning, once a weapon against the Erd Tree, became sanctified as an aspect of gold itself. A dragon cult was established in the capital of Leyndell, where knights and clerics could learn to wield the dragon's ancient incantations. Fortisax himself became a companion to Godwyn, Marika's firstborn son, forging a bond of friendship that would have profound consequences in the ages to come. The integration of the dragons marked the zenith of Godfrey's military campaigns. The lands between were unified under the Golden Order. The great enemies had been vanquished or absorbed. Peace, that rarest of conditions, seemed to settle over the realm. But it was precisely at this moment of triumph that Queen Marika made a decision that would echo through the centuries. She stripped Godfrey of his grace, the golden blessing that marked one as chosen by the Erd Tree. And not just Godfrey, but all his warriors, the battle hardened soldiers who had conquered a world in her name. These warriors, now bereft of grace, became known as the Tarnished. Their eyes, which had once glowed with golden light, grew dull and lifeless. The reasons for this exile remain a subject of speculation and debate among scholars of the Golden Order. Some suggest that Godfrey and his warriors, bred for conquest and battle, had no place in an age of peace. Their very nature, violent and restless, threatened to destabilize the order they had fought to establish. Others whisper of a deeper purpose, that Marika foresaw a time when the Golden Order would falter and need warriors from outside its rigid hierarchy to challenge it. By exiling the Tarnished beyond the fog that surrounded the lands between, she was perhaps planting seeds for a future harvest. Godfrey, now calling himself Huaralu once more, led his people into the wilderness beyond the known world. They would wander for generations, their descendants forgetting the golden grace they had once known, until the day they would be called back. With Godfrey gone and peace established, Marika turned her attention to perfecting the Golden Order itself. Her most significant act was the removal of the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring. This rune, also called Destined Death, was the principle that allowed the true mortality. Its presence in the Elden Ring meant that all things, even gods, could die permanently. By removing it, Marika fundamentally altered the nature of existence in the lands between. Death became something different, a transition rather than an ending. Those who died would return to the Erd Tree, their essence absorbed and eventually reborn. The demigods, children of the goddess, became truly immortal, their souls bound to the great tree itself. But Marika was not foolish enough to destroy the Rune of Death entirely. Such power could not be unmade, only contained. She entrusted it to her shadow, a beast-man warrior named Malekith. Malekith was no ordinary servant. He was Marika's half-brother, bound to her by ancient pacts that predated even her ascension to godhood. In the lands of Farum Azula, that crumbling temple city suspended in a storm beyond time, Malekith had served as a clergyman before becoming Marika's sworn protector, and now he took on a new role as the keeper of destined death. He sealed the rune within his great black blade, a sword that hummed with the power to kill even immortals. Malekith understood the terrible responsibility he bore. If the Rune of Death were ever to be stolen or unleashed, the carefully constructed immortality of the Golden Order would crumble. He became a recluse, hiding himself away, trusting no one, consumed by the duty of guardianship. The removal of death from the natural order had profound consequences. It created a world where the powerful could not be permanently removed, where grudges and conflicts could fester for centuries, where change itself became nearly impossible. But it also allowed Marika to establish institutions and systems that would endure. Among the most secretive of these were the Black Knives, an order of Numen assassins. The Numen were Marika's own people, long-lived beings from beyond the lands between, and these particular warriors were all women, trained in arts of stealth and murder. They operated in the shadows of the Golden Order, handling problems that could not be addressed through open warfare or political maneuvering. Their weapons were unique, curved blades imbued with a fragment of the rune of death itself, stolen or perhaps given by Marika for purposes known only to her. These blades could kill even the immortal demigods, making the Black Knives the ultimate insurance policy against threats from within. As the age of the Erd Tree progressed, Marika gave birth to her children, the demigods who would shape the future of the realm. Her firstborn was Godwyn, called the Golden, a prince of such virtue and nobility that he seemed to embody the ideals of the Golden Order itself. Godwyn inherited his mother's golden hair and his father Godfrey's martial prowess, but tempered these with wisdom and compassion. He was beloved by all who knew him, a true golden child who represented the promise of an eternal age of prosperity. Godwyn's friendship with the dragon Fortisax became legendary, a symbol of the Golden Order's power to unite even the most ancient of enemies. But Marika bore other children as well, and not all of them fit so neatly into the Golden Order's vision of perfection. The exact number and nature of all her offspring remains unclear, lost in the deliberate obscurations of official histories. What is known is that the demigods, as children of a goddess and bearers of fragments of the Elden Ring, possessed tremendous power from birth. Each carried within them a great rune, a shard of the cosmic law that governed reality itself. This made them simultaneously essential to the Golden Order's stability and potential threats to it. Meanwhile, beyond the capital of Leyndell, other powers were establishing themselves within the framework of the Golden Order. To the north, in the land of Liurnia, the Academy of Raya Lucaria had become the preeminent center of sorceress learning. Here, scholars studied the glintstone sorceries, magic derived from the stars themselves rather than from the Erd Tree's grace. Ruling over this realm was Renala, Queen of the Full Moon, a sorceress of unparalleled skill. Renala could commune with the moon itself, drawing power from the cosmos that predated the Golden Order. Her mastery of sorcery was such that she could manipulate the very essence of rebirth, allowing beings to be reborn into new forms. The relationship between Raya Lucaria and the Golden Order was complex. Sorcery represented a form of power, independent of the Erd Tree, a potential challenge to the supremacy of Marika's order. Yet open conflict would be costly and destabilizing. The solution came in the form of marriage. A champion of the Golden Order, a warrior with distinctive red hair named Radagon, waged a campaign against Renala and her forces. But rather than ending in conquest, the war ended in union. Radagon and Renala fell in love, or perhaps recognized the political necessity of alliance, and were wed. The marriage brought Liurnia into the fold of the Golden Order, while allowing the Academy to maintain its independence and traditions. From this union came 3 children, each remarkable in their own right. The first was Rykard, who would grow to become a praetor of the Golden Order, a judge and enforcer of its laws. The second was Radon, who inherited his father's red hair and a warrior's spirit that rivaled even Godfrey's legendary prowess. The third was Rani, a daughter who showed prodigious talent for sorcery from an early age, learning at her mother's side the secrets of the moon and stars. These 3 children of Radagon and Renala occupied a unique position in the hierarchy of the lands between. They were not true demigods, not children of Queen Marika herself, yet their father's status and their mother's power made them forces to be reckoned with. But this family was not destined to remain intact. In a development that shocked the realm and left Renala heartbroken, Radagon abandoned his wife and children to return to Leyndell. The reasons for this decision remain mysterious. Some say he was summoned by Queen Marika herself, called back to serve a higher purpose. Others suggest that Radagon had always been more than he appeared, that his very existence was intertwined with Marika's in ways that defied conventional understanding. What is certain is that Radagon became Marika's second consort, taking the place that Godfrey had once held. He was named Elden Lord, granted authority second only to the goddess herself. The union of Marika and Radagon produced two more children, twins who would become perhaps the most significant of all the demigods. The first was Miquella, called the Unalloyed. From birth, Miquella possessed an otherworldly beauty and a mind of startling brilliance. He was a prodigy in all things, mastering sorcery, incantations, and scholarship with equal ease. But Miquella also bore a curse. Despite his divine parentage, he was afflicted with eternal childhood, his body refusing to age beyond youth. This curse drove Miquella to seek solutions outside the rigid doctrines of the Golden Order. He developed his own school of magic, unalloyed gold, which rejected the influence of outer gods and sought to purify the world of their interference. Miquella's twin was Malenia, called the Blade of Miquella. She too was cursed, afflicted from birth with the scarlet rot, a plague of decay that slowly consumed her body from within. The rot was the influence of another outer god, one that represented decay and corruption, the antithesis of the Erd tree's golden permanence. That such a curse could afflict a child of the goddess herself suggested that Marika's control over the lands between was not as absolute as the Golden Order claimed. Despite her affliction, or perhaps because of it, Malenia became a warrior of unmatched skill. She trained relentlessly, compensating for her weakening body with techniques so refined it approached perfection. She became her brother's protector, his blade, devoted to him with a loyalty that transcended even death. The bond between Miquella and Malenia was profound. Miquella, unable to find a cure for his sister's affliction within the doctrines of the Golden Order, began to look elsewhere. He studied the nature of curses, of outer gods, of the fundamental principles that governed existence. His researches led him to a radical conclusion. The Erd tree itself, the golden order that his mother had established, was fundamentally flawed. It could not accommodate those who did not fit its narrow definition of perfection. The cursed, the afflicted, the unwanted had no place in Marika's golden age. In response, Miquella conceived of an alternative. He would grow his own tree, a rival to the Erd tree itself. This Halig tree, as it came to be known, would be a sanctuary for all those rejected by the Golden Order. It would be watered not with the blood of conquest, but with Miquella's own essence. He embedded himself within the tree, entering a cocoon of unalloyed gold, intending to grow with it until both he and the tree reached maturity. The Halig tree took root in a hidden corner of the lands between, in the snowy reaches beyond the conventional borders of the realm. Around it, a community formed. The afflicted, the cursed, the omen, and the diseased, all those who had been cast out by the Golden Order's rigid hierarchy, found refuge in Miquella's sanctuary. Malenia stood guard over her brother's cocoon, waiting for the day when he would emerge and fulfill his promise of a world free from the tyranny of outer gods. But even as Miquella worked toward his vision of a better future, cracks were appearing in the Golden Order's golden facade. The Erd tree, which had once showered the lands between with blessings and grace, began to show signs of decay. Its sap, which had flowed freely, became scarce. The golden leaves that had once fallen in abundance grew rare. Some whispered that the tree was dying, though such heresy was dangerous to speak aloud. Others suggested that the removal of the rune of death had created an imbalance, that by making death impossible, Marika had also made true life impossible. The lands between were becoming stagnant, unchanging, a golden cage rather than a paradise. The rigid dogma of the Golden Order, which had once seemed a source of stability, now began to breed dissent. The two fingers, those enigmatic entities that claimed to speak for the greater will, issued proclamations and commandments that grew increasingly divorced from the reality of people's lives. The finger readers, blind women who could interpret the will of the two fingers, became figures of both reverence and resentment. The Golden Order fundamentalism, a school of thought that sought to codify the principles of the Erd Tree into absolute laws, gained influence in Landell. Its adherents believed that reality itself could be understood and controlled through the proper application of mathematical and theological principles. But this fundamentalism left no room for mystery, for change, for anything that did not fit within its equations. Hidden conflicts began to simmer beneath the surface of the Golden Order's apparent unity. The demigods, each bearing a great rune and tremendous power, began to develop their own ambitions and philosophies. Some remained loyal to the vision of the Golden Order, while others, like Michaela, sought alternatives. The stage was being set for a great fracturing, though none yet knew when or how it would come. Queen Marika, from her throne in Landell, watched over her realm, her golden eyes seeing perhaps more than she revealed. The age of the Erd Tree had reached its height, and like all things at their peak, it could only begin its descent. And so, as the age of the Erd Tree, a period of perceived peace and prosperity under the Golden Order, began to wane, we transition into a tumultuous new chapter, the Shattering Era. This era, marked by unprecedented chaos and destruction, fundamentally reshaped the lands between and set the stage for the events you, the Tarnished, will eventually encounter. Our story, or rather, the beginning of its unraveling, truly commences with Queen Marika herself. In a move that reverberated across the entirety of the lands between, Marika, the very vessel of the Elden Ring and the divine sovereign of the Golden Order, committed an act of profound despair and defiance. She shattered the Elden Ring. This wasn't a mere accident or an oversight. It was a deliberate, cataclysmic act of rebellion. The Elden Ring, that primordial construct representing the very concept of order and the fundamental laws governing the lands between, was not merely broken, but cracked into numerous powerful fragments, which would come to be known as the Great Runes. This act, born from a deep-seated anguish and a burgeoning defiance against the established order, directly challenged the authority of the greater will, the enigmatic outer god that had guided and empowered the Golden Order for untold ages. Marika, it seems, had reached a breaking point, her faith in the greater will and its dictates irrevocably fractured. The precise motivations for this monumental act remain shrouded in mystery, debated by scholars and whispered in hushed tones across the lands between. Was it a desperate attempt to free herself from the greater will's control? A profound disillusionment with the Golden Order's rigidity? Or perhaps a premonition of a greater, impending doom that she sought to avert through radical means? Whatever her true intent, the consequences were immediate and devastating. The shattering of the Elden Ring was not a quiet affair. It unleashed a cataclysmic event that tore through the fabric of reality itself. Imagine, if you will, the very laws of physics and existence suddenly rewritten, or rather, brutally ripped apart. This wasn't just a political upheaval, it was an ontological crisis. The lands between, once a realm held together by the coherent and consistent dictates of the Elden Ring, plunged headlong into an era of unprecedented chaos and destruction. The very ground trembled, the skies wept fire, and the established order disintegrated into a maelstrom of conflicting energies and raw, untamed power. Cities crumbled, landscapes were scarred beyond recognition, and the intricate web of life that had flourished under the Golden Order was irrevocably disrupted. The delicate balance maintained for millennia was utterly shattered, replaced by a brutal, lawless wilderness where survival became the paramount concern. Naturally, such an audacious act of defiance did not go unnoticed by the greater will. Enraged by Marika's betrayal, the outer god, which had previously exerted its influence through its emissaries and the very structure of the Golden Order, effectively abandoned her and the lands between. This withdrawal of its direct influence was not a benevolent act of non interference, but rather a punitive measure, leaving the shattered realm to its own devices to reap the whirlwind sown by Marika's rebellion. The guiding hand, however indirect, that had shaped the destiny of the lands between for eons was suddenly withdrawn, leaving a power vacuum that would be filled by ambition, greed, and a desperate struggle for dominance. The Golden Order, once the dominant religious and political force, found itself without its divine patron, its authority crumbling as quickly as the Elden Ring itself. In the wake of this cataclysm, a new power structure began to emerge, albeit a fractured and volatile one. The demigods, Marika's numerous offspring and inheritors of her divine lineage, each claimed fragments of the shattered Elden Ring. These fragments, as we mentioned, were the Great Runes. Each Great Rune was not merely a piece of a broken artifact, it was a concentrated essence of the Elden Ring's power, imbued with specific aspects of its former authority. And with this immense power came a terrible price. Each Great Rune, while bestowing extraordinary abilities upon its wielder, also subtly, or sometimes not so subtly, corrupted their minds and bodies. The demigods, already figures of immense power and ego, found their inherent flaws and ambitions magnified and distorted by the influence of these divine fragments. The great runes became both a blessing and a curse, granting godlike strength while simultaneously eroding their sanity and fueling their darkest desires. Let us consider some of these demigods and the specific ways in which the great runes and the chaos of the shattering twisted their destinies. First, there is Godric the Grafted, a descendant of Godfrey and Marika, though a rather distant and diminished one. Driven by a desperate and insatiable desire for power, and perhaps fueled by a deep-seated insecurity regarding his lineage, Godric embarked on a grotesque path. He began grafting the limbs of defeated warriors, both human and otherwise, onto his own body. This macabre practice, a desperate attempt to accumulate strength and overcome his perceived weakness, transformed him into a monstrous multi-limbed abomination. Each grafted limb represented a stolen victory, a desperate grasp at power that only further distorted his physical form and his already fragile mind. His ambition, once perhaps a yearning for recognition, became a ravenous hunger, consuming his very humanity. Then there is Millennia, Blade of Michaela, one of Marika's twin Empyrean children, born of a single god. Millennia, a warrior of unparalleled skill and grace, was tragically afflicted by the scarlet rot, a devastating and incurable disease. This pestilence, believed to be an outer god itself, or at least a manifestation of its influence, slowly consumed her from within, leaving her body scarred and her spirit burdened by an eternal struggle against its relentless progression. The scarlet rot was not merely a physical ailment, it was a cosmic curse, a slow, agonizing corruption that threatened to engulf not just millennia, but eventually the entire lands between. Her resilience in the face of such a debilitating affliction is a testament to her extraordinary will, yet even she was not immune to the crushing weight of its constant presence. Across the vast plains of Caelid, another demigod, Radon, general of the Star Scourge, grappled with a different kind of burden. Radon, a colossal figure of immense physical strength and mastery over gravity magic, held back the very stars with his formidable power. His motivation for this seemingly impossible feat was a profound fear: the return of the outer gods. He understood the cosmic implications of their influence and the potential for utter devastation should they once again assert their dominance over the lands between. His gravity magic, a testament to his unique connection to the celestial bodies, became a perpetual shield, a desperate attempt to maintain a fragile equilibrium against forces far beyond mortal comprehension. This constant exertion of power, however, took its toll, hinting at the immense strain he endured to protect the world from the encroaching darkness. Meanwhile, in the academic stronghold of Raya Lucarian Academy, Renala, Queen of the Full Moon, retreated into a world of sorrow and obsession. Once a powerful sorceress and the beloved consort of Radagon, before his transformation into Marika's second self, Renala was consumed by grief and a profound attachment to a mysterious amber egg. This egg, believed to be a gift from Radagon, became the focal point of her existence, a symbol of lost love and a desperate hope for a new beginning. She remained within the Grand Library, surrounded by ancient texts and the echoes of her past, her once brilliant mind now shrouded in melancholic contemplation, her power channeled into the protection and nurturing of this enigmatic artifact. Her retreat into scholarly isolation was a stark contrast to the martial fervor of her demigod siblings, yet it was no less a consequence of the shattering's pervasive sorrow. Hidden in plain sight, deep within the capital city of Leyndell, stood Morgott, the Omen King. Despite being an Omen, a race reviled and cast out by the Golden Order due to their cursed birth, Morgott secretly defended the Erd Tree and Leyndell with unwavering loyalty. He was a tragic figure, an outcast who nonetheless bore an immense love for the very system that rejected him. His devotion to the Erd Tree, the symbol of the Golden Order, was absolute, a stark contrast to the destructive ambitions of his siblings. He fought tirelessly, often in secret, to preserve what remained of the established order, a silent guardian against the encroaching chaos, his existence a testament to the complex and often contradictory loyalties born of the shattering. And then there was Mohg, Lord of Blood, another omen and a demigod of immense, dark power. Mohg, driven by a twisted ambition and a fervent devotion to an outer god known as the Formless Mother, kidnapped his Empyrean half-brother, Miquella. Miquella, Malenia's twin, was an unblemished Empyrean, a being with the potential to become a true god, but eternally youthful and trapped in a cocoon. Mohg's aim was to elevate Miquella to godhood, not through the established Golden Order, but through forbidden, sanguine rituals, hoping to establish a new dynasty, a new order based on blood and sacrifice. This act of abduction and ritualistic manipulation represented a profound perversion of divine potential, a dark mirror to Marika's own aspirations for her children. Mog's actions were a direct challenge to the established order, a grotesque attempt to seize ultimate power through forbidden means, further deepening the shadows cast by the shattering. With the greater will withdrawn and the demigods corrupted by their great runes, the stage was set for an inevitable and horrific conflict. Fueled by ambition, greed, and the immense power bestowed by their fragments of the Elden Ring, the demigods declared war upon each other. This was not a localized skirmish or a brief period of unrest. This was the Shattering War, a brutal, protracted conflict that engulfed the entirety of the lands between. Each demigod, convinced of their own right to rule and their own interpretation of the future, clashed with their siblings in a desperate struggle for ultimate dominion. The once unified realm became a battleground, a fragmented tapestry of warring factions, each led by a demigod whose power had been amplified and whose sanity had been eroded by the very essence of the shattered Elden Ring. The Shattering War was a period of unimaginable devastation. Cities that had stood for centuries were reduced to rubble, their grand architectures crumbling under the relentless onslaught of divine power and mundane weaponry. Vast landscapes, once verdant and teeming with life, were laid waste, scarred by the magical and physical conflicts that raged across them. The very earth groaned under the weight of this ceaseless warfare, its resources depleted, its beauty marred by that endless bloodshed. The innocent suffered immensely, caught between the warring ambitions of their godlike rulers, their lives irrevocably altered by the pervasive violence and destruction. This was not merely a war of succession, it was a war for the very soul of the lands between, a conflict that tore apart the fabric of society and left an indelible mark on every corner of the realm. The once proud Golden Order, now without its divine patron and its central authority, fractured into countless pieces, its ideals and institutions collapsing under the weight of this internecine struggle. The age of unity and relative peace had ended, replaced by an era defined by conflict, despair, and the relentless pursuit of power. The lands between, once a beacon of divine order, had become a desolate battlefield, a testament to the destructive potential of unchecked ambition and the corrosive influence of power untethered from wisdom. The echoes of this war would resonate for centuries, shaping the very landscape and the psychology of its inhabitants, leading directly to the desperate state you will eventually find it in. And this, of course, is only the beginning of the Shattering era's tragic tale. The relentless, brutal conflicts between the demigod armies, fueled by their insatiable desire for the shattered shards of the Elden Ring, tore the very fabric of the lands between asunder. Countless lives were extinguished in the crucible of war, not just those of soldiers and knights, but also the innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. Villages were razed, cities sacked, and entire populations decimated as the demigods carved their bloody paths across the land. The once vibrant landscapes, teeming with life and the blessings of the Erd tree, were scarred beyond recognition. Verdant fields became barren wastes, rivers ran red with blood, and ancient forests were reduced to charred husks. The very air grew heavy with the stench of death and despair, a constant reminder of the catastrophic cost of ambition unchecked. The devastation was so profound that it would take centuries, perhaps millennia, for the lands between to even begin to recover, if ever. The land itself seemed to weep, its beauty marred by the endless cycles of violence. Amidst this widespread devastation, a more subtle yet equally profound change began to manifest. The Erd tree's brilliant light, once a beacon of hope and divine favor, began to dim. Its golden glow, which had permeated every corner of the lands between, offering warmth and sustenance, started to recede, becoming fainter and more ephemeral. This fading light was more than just a visual phenomenon. It was a tangible sign, a cosmic harbinger, signaling the imminent demise of the Golden Order. The Golden Order, the foundational belief system and political structure established by Marika, had long been sustained by the Erd tree's blessings and the unwavering faith of its adherents. As the Erd tree's light waned, so too did the Golden Order's authority and its perceived divine mandate. The blessings that had once flowed freely from the Erd tree, enriching the soil, healing the sick, and guiding the faithful, became scarce, their potency diminished. This decline was not sudden, but a gradual, insidious process, chipping away at the very foundations of the world as the denizens of the lands between had known it. The fading light was a stark, undeniable testament to the unraveling of an age, a slow, agonizing death of an era defined by divine grace and order. Concurrently with the dimming of the Erd tree's light, the guidance of grace, an ethereal golden glow that had once served as a divine compass for all who dwelt in the lands between, began to falter. This guidance, a manifestation of the greater will's influence and the Erd tree's benevolence, had for centuries directed individuals towards their destinies, illuminating paths, revealing truths, and offering solace. It was a ubiquitous presence and a constant reassurance of divine oversight. However, as the shattering intensified and the Golden Order's grip weakened, this precious guidance became increasingly scarce. For many, the golden light simply vanished, leaving them adrift in a world plunged into chaos and uncertainty. This loss was not merely a spiritual one, it had profound practical implications. Without grace to guide them, individuals lost their sense of purpose, their moral compass, and their connection to the divine. The world, once ordered and purposeful, became a labyrinth of despair and confusion. Those who still possessed a flickering of grace found it to be unreliable, its direction often contradictory or leading to dead ends. The absence of grace was a terrifying prospect, a void that swallowed hope and left only doubt in its wake, signifying a profound abandonment by the very forces that had once sustained their existence. Long before the cataclysmic events of the shattering, a distinct group of warriors, known as the Tarnished, had already experienced this profound loss of grace. These individuals, once favored by the Erd tree and guided by its golden light, had for reasons shrouded in mystery and divine decree been stripped of their grace. Their golden eyes, once alight with the Erd tree's blessing, had dulled, becoming devoid of the ethereal glow that marked the favored. This loss was not merely a symbolic one, it was a physical and spiritual exile. Branded as accursed and forgotten, the Tarnished were forcibly cast out from the lands between, banished to lands beyond the fog, far from the Erd tree's embrace. Their banishment was a decree from the greater will itself, an act of divine judgment that severed their connection to the Golden Order and its blessings. The reasons for this exile are complex and debated, some suggesting it was due to their inherent resistance to the Golden Order's rigid doctrines, others believing it was a preordained plan for a future purpose. Regardless of the cause, the Tarnished became wanderers, exiles in a world that had once been their home, their very existence a testament to the capricious nature of divine favor. They were the first to experience the profound desolation of a life without grace, a prelude to the fate that would eventually befall many others during the shattering. Once revered and guided by the very grace that now eluded them, the tarnished found themselves transformed into figures of scorn and oblivion. Their former status as favored warriors, those destined for greatness, had been utterly obliterated by their banishment. They were no longer seen as honorable protectors or chosen champions. Instead, they were reviled, their very presence considered an ill omen. The people of the lands between, indoctrinated by the Golden Order's teachings, viewed the tarnished as anathema, a living embodiment of divine displeasure. Their names were erased from historical records, their deeds forgotten, and their very existence denied in polite society. To be tarnished was to be a ghost, a specter of a past glory that no longer held any meaning. This ostracization was not merely social, it was deeply ingrained in the cultural fabric of the lands between. Children were warned about the tarnished, tales of their supposed wickedness used to instill fear and obedience. They were seen as a blight, a living reminder of what happens when one falls from the Erd tree's favor. This profound shift in perception solidified their status as outcasts, forever marked by the absence of grace, condemned to wander the fringes of existence, their past glories obscured by the veil of collective amnesia and societal condemnation. In the midst of this widespread ostracization, a clandestine sanctuary emerged, a place of refuge and plotting for the exiled tarnished, the Round Table Hold. This enigmatic location, shrouded in mystery and accessible only through specific means, became a haven for those who had lost the Erd tree's grace. It was not a physical place in the conventional sense, but rather an ethereal space, a pocket dimension existing outside the immediate chaos of the lands between. Within its hallowed halls, tarnished from various backgrounds and with diverse motivations, found common ground in their shared experience of banishment and the absence of grace. The Round Table Hold served as a crucial hub for these forgotten warriors, a place where they could share information, strategize, and forge alliances. Here, the seeds of a rebellion, or at least a concerted effort to reclaim their lost purpose, began to sprout. It was within these walls that whispers of the Elden Ring, of a shattered world, and of a potential path to becoming the Elden Lord, first circulated among the tarnished. The Round Table Hold was more than just a meeting place. It was a symbol of their resilience, a testament to their refusal to be completely forgotten. It was where the dream of returning to the lands between, of reclaiming their grace, and of challenging the established order began to take tangible form, nurtured by the shared grievances and burgeoning ambitions of its inhabitants. As the shattering raged and the Golden Order teetered on the brink of collapse, a chilling silence descended upon the Two Fingers, the revered emissaries of the Greater Will. These colossal, mummified digits, believed to be fragments of the Greater Will itself, had for centuries served as the primary conduit for divine communication. Through their intricate gestures and the interpretations of their devoted finger maidens, the Greater Will's decrees and guidance were conveyed to the inhabitants of the lands between, shaping its destiny and maintaining the Golden Order. However, with the fracturing of the Elden Ring and the subsequent chaos, the Two Fingers fell silent. Their once eloquent and purposeful movements ceased, their pronouncements stilled, leaving their finger maidens in a state of bewildered despair. This cessation of communication was not merely a temporary setback, it was a profound and terrifying indication that the greater will itself had withdrawn, or perhaps was unable to communicate with its earthly servants. The divine tether had been severed, leaving the lands between truly adrift without its celestial shepherd. This silence was a stark confirmation of the Golden Order's unraveling, a testament to the magnitude of the cataclysm that had befallen the world. It signaled a profound abandonment, a void where divine guidance once resided, leaving mortals to grapple with their fate in a world devoid of clear celestial direction. With the two fingers silenced and the Erd tree's light dimming, the once unyielding edifice of the Golden Order began its inevitable descent into ruin. Its institutions, once bastions of authority and unwavering belief, crumbled under the weight of the ongoing war and the loss of divine favor. The various branches of the Golden Order, such as the Golden Order Principia, responsible for the study of fundamentalism, and the Erd Tree Guardians, tasked with protecting the sacred tree, found their power and influence rapidly eroding. Their doctrines, once immutable truths, were now questioned and challenged by a populace increasingly disillusioned by the chaos and suffering. The unwavering faith that had underpinned the Golden Order for millennia began to waver, replaced by doubt, cynicism, and despair. Temples lay desecrated, their altars abandoned, and their priests, once revered, found their sermons falling on deaf ears. The very belief system that had unified the lands between and provided a framework for its society was disintegrating, its authority dissolving like mist in the morning sun. This collapse was not merely political or religious. It was a spiritual apocalypse, leaving a gaping void in the collective consciousness of the lands between, a vacuum that would soon be filled by other, often darker influences. The Golden Order, once an indomitable force, became a ghost of its former self, its power and prestige reduced to mere echoes in a shattered world. The relentless internecine conflict of the shattering, driven by the demigod's insatiable greed for the Elden Ring's shards, did not merely erode the Golden Order. It systematically fractured and weakened the myriad factions and noble houses that comprised the intricate social and political tapestry of the lands between. Each demigod, commanding their own armies and loyalists, waged war not only against their siblings, but also against any lesser lords or independent factions that stood in their path or possessed resources they coveted. The ancient houses, with their long lineages and storied histories, found themselves caught in the crossfire, forced to choose sides or face annihilation. Many were obliterated entirely, their ancestral lands laid waste, their noble lines extinguished. Others were reduced to mere shadows of their former selves, their power broken, their influence diminished. The once intricate web of alliances and rivalries that had governed the political landscape dissolved into a chaotic free-for-all, where survival often meant betraying long-standing loyalties or succumbing to the overwhelming might of a demigod's army. Trust became a luxury, and self-preservation the only guiding principle. The lands between, once a realm of diverse yet interconnected powers, became a collection of isolated, embattled enclaves, each struggling for its own survival in a world consumed by internecine strife, ensuring that no single entity could easily rise to restore order. Even the formidable Carian royal family, a lineage renowned for its mastery of glintstone sorcery and its intellectual prowess, found itself deeply scarred by the relentless conflicts of the shattering. While they possessed immense magical power and a strategically advantageous stronghold in Raya Lucarian Academy, They were not immune to the pervasive chaos. The constant warfare drained their resources, both magical and material, and forced them to commit their formidable sorcerers to defensive and offensive operations, diverting their focus from scholarly pursuits. However, the most profound and tragic consequence for the Carrion family was the devastating impact on their matriarch, Renala, Queen of the Full Moon. Once a brilliant sorceress and a respected leader, the relentless pressures of the shattering, coupled with the profound emotional toll of her husband Radagon's abandonment and subsequent marriage to Marika, gradually eroded her sanity. Her grief and despair, exacerbated by the ongoing war and the loss of her children to the wider conflict, manifested as a retreat into a state of perpetual, childlike reverie. She became obsessed with rebirth, attempting to perfect her children, a tragic echo of her lost love, and a desperate attempt to regain what she had lost. This mental decline rendered her largely ineffective as a leader, leaving a power vacuum within the Carrion family and further weakening their ability to navigate the treacherous political landscape. Her children, particularly Rani, were left to grapple with the consequences of their mother's decline and the ongoing war, further complicating the Carrion family's already precarious position. Amidst the widespread decay of the Golden Order and the diminishing influence of the Erd Tree, an ancient and primordial force began to stir and reassert its chaotic influence in various pockets of the lands between. The Crucible. The Crucible, often referred to as the primordial form of the Erd Tree, represents the raw, untamed, and undifferentiated life force that existed before the Golden Order imposed its rigid structure and concept of order. It is a chaotic amalgamation of all life, a swirling vortex of primal energies from which all things originally emerged, characterized by its diverse and often monstrous forms, such as wings, horns, and tails, which are seen as vestiges of this ancient power. As the Golden Order's grip weakened and its carefully constructed system of beliefs faltered, the suppressed energies of the Crucible began to resurface. In certain areas, particularly those deeply scarred by the Shattering's conflicts or those with ancient, untapped ley lines, the Crucible's influence became palpable. Creatures exhibiting Crucible Knight characteristics, with their distinct armor and unique abilities, began to appear with greater frequency. The land itself seemed to revert to a more primeval state in these regions, with flora and fauna displaying grotesque and powerful mutations. This reassertion of the Crucible's chaotic power was a direct challenge to the Golden Order's narrative of a divinely ordered world, a reminder of the raw, untamed forces that lay beneath the veneer of civilization, threatening to drag the lands between back into an age of primordial, undifferentiated life. It was a terrifying manifestation of the world's unraveling, a return to a more savage and unpredictable era, where the very definition of life and order was being violently rewritten. As the Golden Order, once a formidable bulwark against external influences, crumbled into dust, the outer gods, entities of immense power and cosmic significance, previously held at bay by Marika's rule and the Erd Tree's blessings, began to exert their insidious influence once more. These cosmic entities, each with their own distinct agendas and manifestations, had long vied for control over the lands between, seeking to impose their own concepts of order or chaos upon its inhabitants. With the protective veil of the Golden Order torn asunder by the shattering, the pathways for their influence opened wider, allowing their whispers and temptations to reach the desperate and the vulnerable. The Formless Mother, an outer god associated with blood and rot began to subtly corrupt the land and its creatures, giving rise to new forms of blight and disease. The fell god, tied to the giants and their ancient flame, saw an opportunity for its return, fanning the embers of its forgotten power. The gloam-eyed queen and her godskin apostles, adherents of an outer god of destined death, resurfaced, seeking to reclaim the power that Marika had once sealed away. Even the enigmatic frenzied flame, a force of pure, unadulterated chaos, found new adherents among those driven to madness by the endless war and despair. Each outer god offered a different path, a different salvation, or a different form of destruction, preying on the fears and ambitions of a world without its guiding light. Their reemergence marked a terrifying new chapter in the history of the lands between, transforming the conflict from a mere civil war into a cosmic struggle for the very soul of the realm, with humanity caught in the crossfire of divine ambitions. The cumulative effect of the shattering, the fading Erd tree, the silenced Two Fingers, the crumbling Golden Order, and the re-emerging Outer Gods was the transformation of the lands between into a desolate and perilous realm. The once vibrant and fertile lands, blessed by the Erd tree's grace, became a barren wasteland, scarred by the ravages of war and the creeping influence of various cosmic forces. Cities, once bustling centers of commerce and culture, lay in ruins, their inhabitants either slaughtered or scattered, their grandeur reduced to crumbling stone and forgotten memories. The roads, once safe passages for merchants and travelers, were now fraught with peril, infested by the monstrous remnants of war and the mutated creatures spawned by the Crucible's influence or the Outer God's corruption. Monstrous beasts, twisted by the shattered Elden Ring's power or the encroaching blight, roamed freely, preying on the weak and the unwary. The remnants of the demigod's armies, often reduced to mindless husks or driven to madness, continued their aimless patrols, their weapons still sharp, their purpose now lost to the winds of chaos. The air itself seemed heavy with despair, a palpable sense of loss and hopelessness permeating every corner of the shattered world. Survival became a daily struggle, a brutal test of endurance against overwhelming odds, as the lands between descended into an age of unbridled savagery and profound desolation, a stark contrast to its former glory. Yet even in this abyss of despair, amidst the desolation and the forgotten prophecies, a faint, almost imperceptible stirring began to manifest. The call of grace, once lost to the tarnished, once a distant memory of a banished past, began to whisper to them once more. It was not the brilliant, guiding light of old, but a subtle, persistent pull, a nascent warmth in their long dormant hearts. This return of grace, however faint, was a profound and unexpected event, a sign that the greater will, or perhaps another unknown force, had not entirely abandoned the lands between. It was a beckoning, a silent invitation to those who had been cast out, those who had been deemed unworthy. The call was specific, resonating only with the tarnished, those who had once lost grace, now finding it rekindled within them. It urged them to return, to cross the fog-shrouded seas, to step once more upon the blighted soil of the lands between. The purpose of this renewed grace was clear, though daunting, to become the Elden Lord, to gather the shattered fragments of the Elden Ring, to mend the fractured world, and to re-establish an order, whatever form that might take. This unexpected resurgence of grace was a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness, a final, desperate gamble by unseen forces to restore balance to a world teetering on the brink of utter annihilation. It was the catalyst for a new journey, a pilgrimage of the forgotten, towards a destiny that would reshape the very fabric of the lands between. And so, we arrive at the era following the shattering, a time marked by profound change and the exile of those who would one day become instrumental in the lands between's fate. This period, often referred to as the post shattering exile, begins with a pivotal act of divine manipulation. The Tarnished, a lineage of warriors and leaders, were not merely banished from the lands between by happenstance. This expulsion was a calculated maneuver orchestrated by the greater will itself, the external cosmic entity that governs the order of the lands between. The greater will, acting through its chosen vessel, Queen Marika the Eternal, decreed that these individuals, who had once been blessed by the Erd Tree's golden light, would be cast out. The most prominent figure in this initial banishment, and indeed the very first to bear the title of Tarnished, was Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. Once a formidable warrior, known as Huara Lu in his barbaric youth, Godfrey had stood at Marika's side, leading her armies to victory and establishing the Golden Order. He was the embodiment of strength and martial prowess, his very presence radiating the golden grace of the Erd Tree. Yet in a twist of fate that speaks volumes about Marika's long-term designs, Godfrey was stripped of this divine blessing. His golden eyes, once sparkling with the Erd Tree's light, became dull and lifeless, a visible manifestation of his fallen status. He, along with his loyal warriors, was then exiled from the sacred lands between, sent to wander the desolate fringes of the world. Marika's motivation for such a drastic act was not rooted in malice or disdain. Instead, it was a complex, almost paradoxical expression of her ambition for the lands between, and more specifically, for the Tarnished themselves. She understood that true strength, a strength capable of overcoming even the most profound challenges, could not be forged in an environment of constant divine blessing and effortless victory. Her intention was to temper Godfrey and his warriors through the crucible of death and struggle. By exiling them, by forcing them to confront hardship and loss in the harsh, unforgiving outer lands, she sought to refine their spirits, to imbue them with a resilience that could only be born from adversity. This was a long game, a strategic withdrawal designed to cultivate a future generation of champions, hardened and prepared for a destiny yet unrevealed. She believed that only by facing the ultimate test, by experiencing death and the fear of oblivion, could they truly understand the value of life and the strength required to protect it. It was a brutal form of mentorship, a divine tough love designed to ensure their eventual return would be met with an indomitable will. As the Tarnished ventured into the desolate outer lands, they began to lose more than just the immediate presence of the Erd Tree's grace. The very essence of their connection to the Golden Order, the divine blessing that had once illuminated their path, slowly but inexorably faded. Their eyes, once vibrant and reflective of the Erd Tree's golden light, became dull and lifeless, mirroring the spiritual void that had opened within them. This physical transformation was a stark symbol of their severed ties to the lands between and its divine order. The golden glow, a hallmark of those blessed by the Erd Tree, receded, leaving behind a vacant stare, a testament to their forgotten purpose and their diminished connection to the divine. This loss of grace was not merely aesthetic. It represented a profound spiritual deprivation, a severing of the link that had once guided and protected them. Without the constant influx of the Erd Tree's blessing, their very existence became more precarious, their path forward shrouded in uncertainty. For many of these exiled tarnished, the journey proved to be one of unremitting hardship and eventual oblivion. They perished in obscurity, their names and deeds forgotten by all but the harshest winds of the outer lands. Their purpose, once clear and divinely ordained, became a distant memory, replaced by the immediate struggle for survival. The harsh realities of their exile, the constant threat of unknown dangers, and the slow erosion of their spirit took their toll. Their lives, once filled with the promise of glory, ended in quiet despair, their potential unfulfilled, their sacrifices unremembered. This mass extinction of the tarnished in the wilderness served as a grim testament to the severity of Marika's decree and the unforgiving nature of the world beyond the lands between. It was a winnowing process, ensuring that only the most resilient, the most determined, and perhaps the most fortunate would survive to fulfill their eventual destiny. However, the lineage of the tarnished was not solely confined to those exiled from the lands between. The concept of tarnished extended beyond those who had once known the Erd tree's grace and then lost it. Some individuals, like Fia, the deathbed companion, were born outside the lands between entirely, never having known the direct blessing of the Erd tree. Their tarnished status was inherent, a birthright of their existence beyond the reach of the Golden Order's immediate influence. Fia, for instance, hails from a land where the concept of being held and sharing warmth with the dead is a sacred ritual, a practice entirely alien to the strictures of the Golden Order. Her very existence, her purpose, and her unique connection to the concept of death in life position her as a tarnished who never experienced the initial grace of the Erd tree, yet whose destiny would become inextricably linked to its fate. This highlights the multifaceted nature of the tarnished, encompassing not only those who lost grace, but also those who, by virtue of their birth or circumstances, never possessed it in the first place, yet were still destined to be drawn back to the lands between. Then, a cataclysmic event shattered the very foundations of the lands between, the shattering. This was not a gradual decline, but a sudden, violent eruption of conflict and chaos that tore apart the established order. The precise catalyst for the shattering remains shrouded in some mystery, but its consequences were devastating. The lands between, once unified under the Golden Order, plunged into a brutal war, a fratricidal conflict between the demigod children of Queen Marika. Each demigod, driven by ambition, madness, or a warped sense of duty, sought to claim the Elden Ring for themselves, believing it would grant them ultimate power and control over the destiny of the lands between. The land, once a beacon of divine order, became a battleground, its ancient beauty scarred by endless strife and the wanton destruction wrought by powerful beings. At the heart of this cataclysm was the Elden Ring itself, the very embodiment of the Golden Order and the fundamental laws of the world. In the chaos of the shattering, the Elden Ring was broken, whether by Marika's own hand in a desperate act of rebellion against the greater will, or by the warring demigods in their frenzied pursuit of power. The ring shattered into countless fragments. These fragments, imbued with immense power, became known as the Great Runes. Each great rune represented a piece of the Elden Ring's fundamental laws, and each was claimed by one of Marika's demigod children, granting them immense, albeit fragmented, power. The breaking of the Elden Ring was not just a symbolic event, it was a cosmic rupture, fundamentally altering the very fabric of reality within the lands between, leading to widespread instability and the emergence of new, often horrifying, forms of life and magic. In the immediate aftermath of the Elden Ring's destruction, Queen Marika, the Eternal, the divine sovereign of the lands between, vanished. Her disappearance was as sudden and mysterious as her initial ascent to power. Some speculate she was imprisoned within the Erd Tree, a consequence of her defiance, or a desperate attempt to contain the chaos she may have inadvertently unleashed. Others believe she simply retreated, her purpose fulfilled, or her will broken by the unfolding tragedy. With Marika gone, a power vacuum emerged, further exacerbating the war among her demigod offspring. Amidst this turmoil, Radagon, Marika's second consort, and unbeknownst to many, an aspect of Marika herself, attempted to repair the broken Elden Ring. His efforts, however, proved futile. Despite his immense power and his unwavering devotion to the Golden Order, the Elden Ring remained shattered, its pieces scattered, and its power fragmented. Radagon's desperate attempts to restore order only highlighted the profound damage inflicted upon the world, and his failure underscored the irreversible nature of the cataclysm. As the shattering raged and the Elden Ring remained broken, the very source of the lands between's divine blessing, the Erd Tree, began to wane. Its once vibrant golden light, which had illuminated the entire realm, dimmed considerably. The blessing it bestowed upon the land and its inhabitants became less potent, less pervasive. This dimming of the Erd Tree's light was a direct consequence of the Elden Ring's shattering, as the ring was the very heart of the Golden Order that the Erd Tree represented. Without the Elden Ring's complete and unified power, the Erd Tree's ability to imbue the world with its grace was severely hampered. The once abundant golden motes that drifted through the air, symbols of divine favor, became scarcer, and the land itself began to show signs of decay and neglect, mirroring the spiritual decline that had befallen its inhabitants. Yet even in this era of darkness and despair, a faint, almost imperceptible stir began to ripple through the outer lands. The call of the Erd Tree, though diminished, had not been entirely silenced. It was a primordial yearning, a deep-seated instinct that began to draw the exiled Tarnished back towards the lands between. This call was not a direct, audible summons, but rather a subtle, persistent pull, a whisper in the subconscious that stirred a forgotten purpose within them. It was the ancestral memory of their connection to the Golden Land, a faint echo of the grace they had once known. This nascent awakening marked the beginning of a new chapter, a slow but inexorable return of those who had been cast out. And with this subtle call, the guidance of grace, though faint and almost imperceptible, began to stir within the Tarnished once more. It was not the brilliant, undeniable light they had once known, but a flickering ember, a barely discernible thread of golden light that offered direction amidst the pervasive gloom. This renewed, albeit weakened, guidance was a testament to Marika's long-term plan, a delayed fulfillment of her intention to temper and refine her chosen warriors. The grace, which had seemingly abandoned them, now offered a glimmer of hope, a path back to the lands between, and perhaps to a destiny far greater than they could ever have imagined in their long years of exile. This faint guidance would be their compass, leading them through the shattered realm, towards the Erd Tree, and towards the ultimate confrontation with the fragmented power of the Elden Ring. The Tarnished are destined to reclaim the great runes, those potent fragments of the shattered Elden Ring, each now held by Marika's demigod offspring. These aren't mere trinkets, but symbols of immense power, each imbued with a portion of the Golden Order's divine authority, yet also corrupting its wielder. Consider Godric the Grafted, a direct descendant of Godfrey, first Elden Lord, and Marika herself, who, in his desperate attempt to emulate his glorious ancestor, has grafted the limbs of countless tarnished and other creatures onto his own body, a grotesque testament to the rune's influence. His great rune, likely the great rune of the unborn, or a similar shard of the Elden Ring, fuels his ambition and his monstrous form, twisting him into a caricature of a lord. Then there's Renala, Queen of the Full Moon, who, despite her profound magical abilities and her status as a demigod by marriage to Radagon, has retreated into a shell of grief and endless rebirths within the Academy of Raya Lucaria, her great rune, the great rune of the full moon, enabling her to endlessly rebirth her students, a poignant reflection of her inability to move on from her loss. Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, has allowed himself to be devoured by the god-devouring serpent, becoming one with the monstrous entity in a bid for ultimate power, his great rune, the great rune of blasphemy, fueling this unholy union and his defiance of the Erd Tree. These are but a few examples, each demigod's fate intertwined with the corrupting influence of their great rune, a constant reminder of the catastrophic power that now lies fragmented across the lands between. The ultimate task for the Tarnished, therefore, is to become the Elden Lord. This isn't just a title, but a sacred duty, a restoration of order to a fractured world. To achieve this, the Tarnished must gather these great runes, not merely for their power, but as components to mend the Elden Ring itself. The act of mending isn't a simple repair, but a re-establishment of the very laws of the world, a reweaving of the fabric of reality that was torn asunder by Marika's shattering. This monumental destiny is communicated to the Tarnished by the two fingers, enigmatic, colossal digits that serve as conduits for the greater will, the outer god that governs the Golden Order. These silent, ancient entities, housed within the divine towers and other sacred locations, impart their will through their finger readers, interpreting the subtle tremors and vibrations of their colossal forms into prophecies and directives. Their communications, often cryptic and delivered through intermediaries, confirm the Tarnished's divine mandate, urging them onward toward their arduous quest. To aid in this monumental undertaking, a sanctuary known as the Round Table Hold is established. This isn't a physical location in the traditional sense, but a spiritual nexus, a shared space accessible to all Tarnished through a special grace. It serves as a place of guidance and training, a refuge from the dangers of the lands between, and a hub for information and collaboration.